trip. I'm Teresa, a board member at the Washington National Park Fund, and I am honored to be your host today. Before we start, there are a few housekeeping items. This trip is 45 minutes with a presentation from our speaker and a Q&A at the end. Feel free to enter any questions into the chat box as we go. It has closed captioning enabled, which you can access at the bottom. We welcome any feedback as we work to make these trips as accessible as possible. For those of you new to the Washington National Park Fund, also known as WNPF, we are the official nonprofit partner for Mount Rainier, North Cascades, and Olympic National Parks. We have the deep honor to work closely with these parks and their park leadership as we work to fund 30 to 40 priority projects each year. These projects fall into 4 core areas: advancing science and research, improving visitor experience, expanding volunteerism and stewardship, and embracing inclusion. Today, we're excited to highlight a project that blends history, stewardship, and access at North Cascades National Park Complex. It is an honor to play a role in making this project possible. We're so thrilled to be joined today by Sam Richert, who has been a museum curator for the National Park Service since 2009. She began management of the North Cascades NPS Complex Museum in 2015. Sam is also a native plant gardener on the 4 acres that she stewards at the base of Sauk Mountain. We're so excited to dive in today to learn about this important project and the work done by the archive team. So Sam, if you would, take it away.
Thank you very much for having me. It's really such an opportunity to get to talk about the collection. It's really a terrific collection at North Cascades with all kinds of different materials and lots of scientific specimens, historical photographs, resource documentation. It's really a snapshot of the whole park. And so I hope that you'll get out of this just how those things kind of intersect. So I'm trying to share my screen here. Does that look good? Okay.
It looks great.
Okay. Now I'm making sure that I can actually advance the screens. Oh, or not. Yep. Okay. So, and this might take a second. We notice that when we get started, there's like a little bit of lag. So we'll just move right into, I wanted to show you some maps. Teresa, are you seeing a map right now?
I am indeed. Looks great.
Okay, perfect. Okay. When I talked to the interpreters about this presentation, they recommended that I just help situate people as to what we're talking about. Parks are land. And so where are we in this geography? So here's the 3 parks that WNPF supports. And here's North Cascades up in the top corner. And let's see here. And there's more specifically the park itself, or it's the park complex. So we have it's not probably a totally unique structure, but it is a little different from some of the national parks you might be more familiar with, like Olympic and Mount Rainier, where it's just a single unit. We have 3 units, and the North Cascades National Park itself is primarily, almost entirely wilderness, and that was the purpose in its enabling legislation, to have it be largely untouched. And then Ross Lake National Recreation Area is really, it's either side of the Highway 20 corridor and includes the Skagit Hydroelectric Project, the 3 dams that are run by Seattle City Light. And so there's different uses of that. So it doesn't quite fit with the vision for the national park. So we just kept that as a national recreation area. And then Lake Chelan down in the bottom, that national recreation area is a national recreation area because there's a large homesteading community there. And so that's a better legal structure than having a very, very protected land space. It's still pretty protected, and sometimes there's tensions around that. But really the purpose is to respect the homesteaders that are living there and the community. So Cascade Pass, I'm going to talk about a lot today, and you're going to see in the bottom right-hand corner just sort of an overview of where that trail fits in the south unit of North Cascades National Park. And I think it's worth noting just all the white there, that's all glaciers, and we have more glaciers in this park than Glacier National Park. And for a while, there was even this whole concept of like icy peaks parks, and all these glaciers contribute to that. But that was a 1930s thing. That didn't happen. But anyway, I'll talk to you more about the history of that. So now looking at the trail itself, you can see all of these switchbacks, which are one of the reasons that it's one of the most popular trails in this park, because it's fairly easy for people to get to in relation to some of the other trails in the wilderness. And so it is one of our most used parts of the park. It's definitely the most used part of North Cascades National Park. And as a result, there are impacts on that ecosystem. And so that's part of what we're talking about today. And they aren't just from park visitors. It's been used by animals and people for thousands of years. So we'll talk about that as well. Just to give you kind of an overview of where we're going, I'm going to talk about the natural history of Cascade Pass and the cultural history and how that butts up into the park's history, and then narrow in on the revegetation program and the history of that program, and then talk about, those records sit now in our museum collection. And so that's kind of where I come in, is making those records available. And a big part of that is this photograph collection that the WNPF has funded a large part of the processing of those photographs and making them accessible. So we'll talk about that digitization project and also our digital archive that's available to the public at the end. So let's see. So the ecosystem, it's a subalpine ecosystem, which means that it's mostly snow up there for most of the year. And it really only starts to thaw out in June. And then maybe we'll start to get over-snowed in October, which means that the plants that live up there don't have a very long growing season. And that's a big reason why they're so fragile. They're growing in poor soil with, inclement weather, and they kind of struggle to make it. And that's one of the reasons I just have a ton of respect for those plants to just power through in that ecosystem and be quite beautiful. So what you're seeing in this photo, this is a recent photo that one of the interpreters gave me, and I'm going to kind of talk. I have a lot, every single slide in this has photos because I'm a photograph curator. And so I'm going to talk to you a lot about these photos. This one is a recent one that was taken by an interpreter ranger. And you can see this sort of idea of like tree islands, that there's little clumps of trees and they're not huge because they're growing up high. And then the melt from the glaciers and snowfields creates in sort of the pockets of it moist meadow that's dominated by two types of sedges. And the plant people always say sedges have edges, and that's how you can tell that they're different from grasses. So those sedges do well up there. And then when there's sort of more like a knoll or a little higher spot that's a little bit better drained, there's going to be kind of those really showy, incredibly special plants like the Cascade huckleberry, pink mountain heather, white heather, and partridge foot. Let's see here. So, and those plants all support wildlife. So what you'll see a lot up there is hoary marmots and pikas, mountain goats, deer, black bears, which if you think about bears and berries, it makes a lot of sense. They would spend a lot of time gathering huckleberries up there in the summer. Raptors that are preying on the marmots and pikas and the squirrels. And then I'm going to tell you this now, and I'm also going to tell you again at the end. Our wildlife biologist who gave me this information said, could you please mention to people to not feed the squirrels, because apparently they're very food habituated and probably a little pudgy, and that's not really allowing them to live their natural life cycle. So just putting that out there. And then an important species that's up there is the Mount Rainier white-tailed ptarmigan, because I don't think it's endangered, but it's probably threatened. When we say federally listed, it's in one of those categories where at least we're worrying about it a lot. So that's up there. And then just like humans, this corridor is used by wildlife for migration. And so wolves and wolverines, which we don't have huge populations of them in this park. So that means it's extra special that they use it to get from the wet side of the mountains to the drier side of the mountains when that seems right for them. So And this is a photo from one of the interpreters. I mean, I couldn't pass that up. Like this mountain goat, I just thought I am a fan of cute critter pictures, so I had to share this mountain goat with you. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the archaeology in Cascade Pass. So Bob Nierendorf, who is our longtime archaeologist, in 2004 did a significant survey and some test units at Cascade Pass, finding artifacts dating, the oldest artifacts in the park, 9,600 years old. So this is a route that's been used for a very long time. And it's a fairly accessible way to get over the mountains compared to some of the other mountain passes, even though it's a little higher than some of the mountain passes. It's correctly placed. Like it lets out into the Stehekin Valley. It's easy to access the east side from there and find some really good resources. So it's the bridge between the Coast Salish peoples on this side and the Columbian Plateau peoples on the other side. And we definitely have evidence in the archaeology collection, as well as other archaeology collections in the Park Service, that there was trade. So we know that there was items that came from the Columbian Plateau that have showed up on the west side. And the same thing on the west side, or on the east side, there's been things that have shown up that would have come from the west side. And so I always just think it's important to remember that tribes weren't static. They moved around. Trade exists, migration exists. Tribes would come into the mountains to hunt goats and gather wool from when goats shed. That shed wool was an important material for weaving, gathering berries, and then and also the travel. So this picture that you're looking at right here is the stratigraphy of what we call the layers from an archaeological pit. And those white bands that you're looking at are what we call tephra, which is the consolidated volcanic ash from different volcanic eruptions. And that is one of the reasons that we're able to date this specifically, is that we know when these volcanoes erupted. And so therefore we can date how deep we're going and what artifact is found by just that, the soil layers. But also we do things like carbon dating on the artifacts and things like that. But this is a picture that we show a lot when we're talking about archaeology at Cascade Pass, because the archaeologists they love this picture, because they're like, look at all the layers, and you can tell exactly, like where we are in the grand geological timeline. And so I wanted to share that with you. And I also really want to talk about just a land acknowledgement that this park complex exists on the traditional lands of Coast and Interior Salish, Upper Skagit Indian tribes, Soxhual Indian tribes, the Stillaguamish Nation, the Swinomish Nation, and the Colville Confederated Band are actively engaged in what happens in this landscape, and that they're here, and they continue to maintain that collection, and they continue to be partners. And one of the things that I really I'm a little verklempt. I'm so proud of my boss, because she really, she's the tribal liaison, and she just really, really prioritizes that work. It's just so important to us. So sorry, I'm a very soft touch. So this is probably not the only time I'm gonna get choked up during this presentation, because this stuff is all very meaningful to me. I'm just gonna say that. So anyway, moving on. The post-contact history. So yes, Native people were here using this, and then Euro-Americans showed up and started to be present in this landscape as well. Continuing to use this passage across the mountains. This photo that we're looking at right here is from the Mary Roberts Reinhardt album that we have in the collection, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But just it's evidence, most clearly dating back to 1916, that people were up in here using it, but more in a tourist capacity in the way that we would use it now, rather than resource gathering. Although certainly people were also resource gathering. I think that's been fairly consistent until the Park Service wilderness designation. So the interest in having the North Cascades become a national park started in the late 1800s, and it was primarily focused in the Stehekin district because there was already lodges and tourist activity happening. So that, and this artist Julian Ittner, who was a painter, really pushed hard for it to become a national park. It kind of didn't go anywhere because there's always been this sort of tension around resource use in the landscape. And the Forest Service, which was created in 1897, or I'm sorry, the Forest Reserve was created in 1897, and it proved to be so unwieldy that then Congress created the Forest Service to manage it. And so in 1905, this landscape started to be managed by the Forest Service, which does not mean that there wasn't anybody here. I mean, there were definitely homesteaders on both sides of the mountains, mining claims, forestry. There was very active use of this landscape. And then in 1916, Mary Roberts Reinhardt made this trip, and she was a popular novelist. I can't think of somebody to compare her to, but she was, she was writing for the masses, entertaining stuff. And the Great Northern Railway was pushing for more tourism in the West and really all across the US, because there had been this tendency for the upper classes to do, the European Grand Tour. And that was what every young person coming of age and the elites needed to do. And they started pushing for see America first. Like, you should see this beautiful country instead of going across the ocean to see somebody else's country. And the railroads were really pushing that because they were building like crazy at that time. So she wrote a book about this called Tempting Tonight, and I have a link for it. There's going to be some links shared when this is uploaded to YouTube, and I encourage you to kind of follow up on some of those, because there were some cool resources out available on the web, not just from our collection, but just out in the world about this area. So this also is pretty good documentation of not exactly tender use of this landscape. So, there's grazing, there's people laying around, and remembering, of course, that these subalpine plants are it takes them a while to bounce back. So this, we can see for a long time that this has been an issue, even though these photos are pretty great. So continuing on, the Seattle City Light Dams are built from 1921 to 1953. So that's on the west side of the mountains now. And there's this continuing quandary. There's a great administrative history written for the park, which is also in the links, and it's called Contested Terrain. And really, a lot of it is about the battles between different groups about what was the best use of this landscape, and what is the best way to preserve this landscape, or are we even trying to preserve it? And one of the issues is, well, we already have hydroelectric dams and we already have homesteader inholdings. So how do you create that? And in the 1960s, very much on the wave of the conservation movement, the North Cascades Conservation Council was founded earlier, I think in the mid 1950s, but check me on that. But they put out a proposal for the 3-unit solution that we have now. And it took a while to get there, but I think it's of note that it was an advocacy organization that came up with that, not the government. They really, I mean, I can't say enough respect for North Cascades Conservation Council. It's been full of hardworking and smart people for a long time that are really passionate in their care for this landscape. So, and we'll talk more about Joe and Margaret Miller, who were important in that organization. So this photo that we're looking at is from the 1963 NPS Survey Collection. I think that the next slide is about that. So okay, there's lots of attention on the North Cascades. There's awareness that there's a lot of logging and resource use happening. There's a very active conservation movement and a focus on wilderness as well. So the Forest Service and the Park Service sent a joint commission out to survey the entire area, and they went down as far as Glacier Peak and up to Okanagan, took tons of photographs, a lot of them really gorgeous. It's one of the most scenic collections, I think, that we have here at North Cascades. And so the WNPF, that was the first project that they gave us money for digitization. And we have these photos that, the first set of photos are all the black and white prints. Those are up and available in the digital gallery that we'll talk about later. And we're still working on the color slides. So anyway, this is a great collection, and I just recommend browsing through it when you have a little bit of time. And there's lots of these really cool aerial photographs of the mountains that are just really spectacular and really give you a sense of just how vast this landscape is. So then the Wilderness Act passed in 1964, and that really kind of put in the docket, like, well, is the National Park Service going to have wilderness parks? Like, are we participating in that? And so with this 3-unit solution, the North Cascades National Park, the intention in the legislation is for it to become wilderness, but it took a little bit because there's a process that happens where, areas are identified as potential wilderness, and then they become actual wilderness. And there's like, the boundaries are really important because it establishes what staff can do on different parts of the land, like how careful do you need to be, because in wilderness you have to be really careful, and that you have to hold these values. These are the 5 wilderness values. The intact ecosystem is what really particularly drives the revegetation program activity at Cascade Pass, and this untrammeled quality, which is hard to get in a place that's kind of trammeled, but it is undeveloped. There's not well, there is a little bit of structure up there because there was some work done by the trail crew to try to funnel people to keep from spreading out all over the meadows and try to kind of keep people on the path. And there's the patio up there, which is like a picnic area, rather, so hoping that people will, eat their lunch on the what they call the patio, which is sort of like a big rocky area. I mean, it's not huge. It's really supposed to be like a patio. And that way you're not setting down your pack on the mountain heather or, getting off trail too much. At Cascade Pass, you're not going to probably have a lot of opportunities for solitude, but this picture was taken by one of the interpretive rangers, and that shows this solitary tent on the glacier camp of Sahali Arm. And to me, that looks fairly solitudinal. I mean, it's really like, that's just like, what a view, like to wake up in the morning from that tent and see that, what a view, amazing. The other features of value, they kind of came on board a little bit later, because I think there were some, I feel like you could say there were some issues in perspective that were brought up by cultural resources, people, and just sort of general people out in the world. That's like, there's kind of no such thing as a landscape that's completely free of humans, because we know that indigenous people have been in these landscapes for thousands of years. And we know that this pass has been used for thousands of years. And there are historic structures in the park. And early on in this park, there was an active move to just burn down structures in the wilderness. There were some that were burned. And now it's kind of softened up a little bit more. It's okay to have historic structures in the wilderness, that there's a recognition that the idea of wilderness is a social construction, and that, people have been on the landscape, but still trying to preserve a place where it's not overrun by the built environment. And the way, it's a pretty drastic, even though there's human touches on the landscape, compare like the Chilliwack to the city of Seattle, and it's pretty different. And that's what we're trying to preserve, is have places like that are not totally dedicated to people. So Joe and Margaret Miller were really powerhouses in this whole story. Just amazing people. Joe was a World War II veteran, an engineer, and I regret that I don't know if Margaret had a career outside the home. I did find some great resources, and the North Cascades Conservation Council has their back issues of their newsletter up online, and that was where I looked to find more information about the Millers. I have to say that there was a lot, and I didn't have as much time as I wanted to just really read that closely, but we do have some collections from the Millers in our collection, some photographs and some process exhibits when they protested the High Ross Dam. And so I'm looking forward to going back to revisit all of that and get more familiar with what they did, because they were really amazing boosters of this park and advocates, but also they put in the time. So in 1970, 2 years after the park had received its enabling legislation, they retired just to volunteer for this park. And they performed botanical surveys of Big Beaver and Cascade Pass. I have those reports available. They just were digitized. I don't have them up online yet, but they will be up in Data Store, which is a different platform, but I can give people information about that if they want. And one of the reasons that they did that is that Joe Miller was so upset about the conditions that he found Cascade Pass in, and so that was a big focus of theirs. And I'm going to move to this next slide, but first, these pictures, I just want to give credit to North Cascades Conservation Council, because we don't have any pictures. There's probably pictures of the Millers and the revegetation program photos, but those pictures aren't pictures where people pose for a photo. So it's usually kind of hard to tell who's in the picture because they're busy like digging and taking plants places and stuff. But here are like two classic photos of them from the North Cascades Conservation Council website. And they're just, nice people, quite frankly. So they had some challenges if they were going to revegetate Cascade Pass. Nobody had really propagated subalpine plants before. They were absolute pioneers in this field. There was a lot of thought from horticulturists in general that subalpine plants would not grow at sea level. So and I see that I'm completely running out of time. So I'm just going to move along a little bit, but just say it was pioneering, and they really did a lot of work. And they also received some really good support from the Wilderness District staff. Including Bill Lester, who was just like a legendary backcountry ranger here. But there was, under Bill Lester, the Wilderness Program set up an entire system of monitoring sites to measure the impacts that people had on backcountry campgrounds in particular. So while the first tranche of photos that's going to go up online from this collection is going to be all about Cascade Pass, because that's a really big part of this collection, there will also be a lot more that are about different monitoring. So I'm going to kind of move on a little bit here, but I do want to say, I want to highlight one thing here, which is that we maintain genetic integrity of plants in this park. So if we're planting something up at Cascade Pass, it means that the seed has been gathered at Cascade Pass. And so we had plants that some staff and volunteers took up this fall. And, there was a whole, like the data associated with those plants, it's like there's records on when it's collected, there's records on when it was propagated. There's just really close attention. It's not just, it's not the same as like getting a packet of lettuce seeds and throwing it out in the garden. I mean, it's a very scientific and very rigorous process to go through this, because we want to be so careful about maintaining the genetic integrity of the ecosystem, as well as just sort of what it looks like. So coming to the museum program, there are so many photographs in this collection. I mean, really thousands. And the resource staff in this park absolutely love taking slides. So there's so many slides, and slides have to be kept in freezers. We double wrap them with these little humidity monitoring cards, and then we keep them in a freezer because that prevents the emulsion of the photographs from breaking down. But it also makes it really hard to access them. And to me, it's really important information that needs to get out there. So when everything shut down in 2020, it was a really good time for me to start working on the digital archive, because it was something I could do from home. And that was when we started getting photos up. But it is going to be under construction for a very long time, because there's just so many photos to get up. But hopefully we'll make some progress on that every year. And the WNPF support has been really important, because both for the NPS survey, the 1963 collection, and for the revegetation collection, what that's meant is an intern to help me, and that person then can just work just on that project. And that's been it moves things along so much more than if it's just me, because I kind of have to do a lot of things in my job. So what the Revegetation Program Records digitization project looked like was WNPF funded 800 hours of internship from the National Council of Historic Preservation, which is a partner organization that provides the Park Service with access to generally young people. You have to be within 2 years of graduating school, although I don't know that there's any age limit if you're a returning student. But generally they've been, under 30. The student, well, it was a museum and library, I'm sorry, MLIS. It's not Museum and Library Sciences. It's Masters of Library Information Systems. And that was Eddie. And Eddie did an amazing job of digitizing all the slides in the collection, and then wrote metadata for the Cascade Pass photos, and then partial metadata for the other photos. And you can see the numbers there. It's about 3,500 photos. And the justification behind it is that we want to support the development of the Wilderness Stewardship Plan, and being able to access this data about impacts on backcountry sites is going to help us figure out a lot of things about what needs to happen so that we can manage the wilderness and get access to people, but also make sure that it's not getting overused. Because we have had a huge increase in use in this park. And we also, it's one of those things where it's like you want people to access it, but you also want to make sure that it survives intact. And on the west side, that's often not quite so hard, because the tropical rain, or the temperate rainforest will bounce back pretty easily. But once you get into the subalpine meadows, they do not bounce back that well. So this I'm showing you so you get an idea of, or I'm just going to walk you through the digital archive a little bit so that you get an idea of what it is and how to use it. And so you can see here that there's 10 different collections, and not all of them are populated. So because it's very much a work in progress, but that was the first thing that the developers wanted. It was for us to set up what our collections were going to be. So the historical photograph collection has the Mary Roberts Reinhardt, and then also an album from a sourdough lookout Charles had, and then the 1963 survey collection. And there's going to be lots more photographs that are going to end up in there over time, but that's what we have right now. The contemporary images are created by our interpreters, and that's generally for them to use for their programs and their social media posts. The Davis Family Collection is the most complete historical collection that we have of homesteader families on the west side of the mountains. And that includes diaries from Lucinda Davis, and some really cool glass plate negatives, and just sort of a really interesting smattering of, some of them are mining claims, newspaper articles. It's sort of an interesting mixed collection. The glacier monitoring photographs also populated with some that was a priority for me to digitize and get up, simply because I just think those photographs are absolutely gorgeous. And also it's an opportunity to keep an eye on our glaciers, which are struggling. The natural resource management photographs does not have anything in it yet, but that is where the revegetation program photos are going to go. And so that will be the first tranche into that collection. The petrographic images, not a very large collection, but they're so cool. Again, something I just wanted people to see. They are made out of the images from thin sections in the geology collection, which geologists will make these very, very thin slides and then shoot polarized light through them. And it allows them to see the molecular structure of the rock, but is also super cool. So I just wanted people to be able to see that. Historic Structures is a collection that's hopefully going to come online sometime during 2025, but is not currently populated. Finding Aids does have some finding aids for the collection, but I will probably in the future replace it with a gallery of ferns and lichens and fungi, because we have some great photos of those. And I think that'll be more immediately helpful for people than, finding aids are kind of dry. The aerial photographs are not populated yet. We have everything digitized, but we're still working on the data for that. And then the archaeology program photographs, that's specifically for the archaeologists. I do a lot of reference support for them, and it will help them a lot to be able to access those photos online. But that's sensitive information, and so that's really only accessible to a few people. But the developers wanted it to just be included. That's just kind of how they work. So, and just if you get into one of the collections, you can, I'm just kind of, I guess I kind of already talked through this, so let me keep going. So if you choose the historical photograph collection, it will click to a page that has these searchable categories. And then also you can, like I just chose the Charles C. Had Sourdough Lookout album. And then it showed, so this is what came up. And it just begins to show me all of the photos that are in there, 181 photographs. And they just kind of start at the beginning. And then if I click on another one, okay, so I picked a photo and I clicked on that, and you can see at the top it says image information and downloads. So if you stay in this view, you can just go previous, next, you can browse the collection. But if you go to image information and downloads, then you start to see the beginning of the metadata. So at first, the first little bit is it allows you to download in different resolutions, which is great for me because I upload the highest resolution on uncompressed TIFF. And then it will just automatically create these smaller versions for you. So you can decide what you want to have out of that. And then this is the metadata. And this is the holdup of why it's so hard to get all these photographs up online, is that all of this has to be written for every single photo, and it takes time. And it's important because the alt text, creates accessibility. We want to make sure that that's solid. We want to have description about it. We want people to know where this, what is the background for this photo, or where did this come from, and how does this sit in the collection, and then all the other things, copyright and searchable keywords and all that kind of stuff. And this is what the back end of that looks like. And this is how I've burned out 2 interns in a row writing the metadata, because it's so much more fun to digitize the slides. But then this metadata has to get written, and poor Eddie's eyes were just spinning in circles by the end of their internship. I mean, they worked so hard, but I always tell them, break up your workflow, like don't just leave the metadata to the end, but somehow it's just always easier to do other things that are not as challenging as writing alt text for, 3,500 photographs. So I just kind of want to bring that out to you so that you know that it takes time and energy for people to get these things up online in a good, like solid way that has a lot of information associated with it. So just want to let you know that the Cascade Pass revegetation photos, the metadata just needs to be edited by me. So I'm hoping to have that up by like late winter of next year, or 2025. So just a few months from now. There's a lot more metadata to write for the remaining sites, so that's going to be a whole other year at least. I want to talk to you about the wilderness stewardship planning process. That's something to keep an eye out for if you are somebody that really wants to have an opinion on planning processes and give feedback. It will be, I think, a public process. It'll have to go through the PEPC, which is the People, Environment, and Policy website, where people can comment. And it's going to take a bit, it's going to take a lot of research to try to figure out, like, how do we want to manage and what is the best thing, and then getting comments from the public so that we are just engaging with everybody on what are we doing to take care of this landscape. And then I also want to talk just a little bit about the 1963 survey collection. I have a terrific volunteer, Caitlin Harron, and also Randy Godfrey. So 2 terrific volunteers. Caitlin has been digitizing the photos and really sweating over making them beautiful. And then Randy has been verifying the locations for me. And then also some of the photos do have some kind of like scratches and dirt on the emulsion because they were stored in an attic before they came to us. So that particular collection we're doing a little bit of cleanup on. That's not something we normally would do. Like, you can look at this photo, which is from the Revegetation collection, and it's you can see some spots up there. even though we vacuum the slides and we try to make them really clean, they are slides that have been used, and they take some damage. But this collection in particular, I think of more as data and information and less about the aesthetics of it. And so there's no way that we're going to image correct, 3,500 slides. So, and I want to also point out to you the bottom here, this little bit of text, because this is, let's see, no, actually, well, just when you see this TH9, there's another photograph here, and I think I might have blown past it, but it had kind of more of the like really technical data that's associated with each one of these slides. They're each going to have this code, like that TH9 is for Thornton 9 or Thornburg 9, because Thornburg came and did a whole mapping of Cascade Pass. And so when we revisit sites, that's how we establish continuity over time, is by coding them according to which site they're taken. And then they have dates, and then they have other notes. And so there's, but it's not always aesthetically pleasing. It's kind of crunchy data stuff. And so right now I'm not actually asking WNPF for any more funding, because we just have so much catching up to do on the metadata. And what it is something that, as a fully fledged curator, I have the right skill set to sit down for an entire day and work on a spreadsheet of metadata. It's not as hard for me as it is for a younger person that's not as established in the field. And maybe I just have good skills for that. I don't know. But I really need to do a lot of that work. And then I also have an intern right now who's working on the archaeology program photos. So we are continuing to move on building this archive, but there's also other things that that have to be balanced as well. So my feeling is, like, rather than having like 6 projects all partly done, is like, let me finish these projects that are partway through, and then, do some identification of what are we doing next. And so it's going to take me a little while to catch up. And I wanted to talk to you just about if you want notifications, I think it would be a smart thing for me to start an email list. And that way, if I know people are interested, and I can just send out an email of like, hey, there's this new group of photographs that just came up online. And that will, is a better trigger for them trying to like randomly show up and see if anything is new there. And then I have some park staff. Every time I talk to somebody in the park getting information for the presentation, they were like, and could you tell the people, it's like, please stay on the trail. Please do not feed the squirrels. Especially with bears, please, please, please secure your food, or anybody that's going up to Cascade Pass. It's okay to be annoying and tell them, like, please just secure your food, because we have had a lot of human bear interaction in this park in the last few years. A lot of people are not as savvy about interacting or staying away from wildlife as we would like, and don't really recognize that bears have incredibly acute noses, and they will know if you have food, and you can't just leave a pack somewhere and walk away. And it's just so important, because those habituated bears are really at risk of losing their bear lives. Like, they are a relocated bear has it's very rare that a relocated bear will survive. And then sometimes there are bears that get shot, and it's upsetting for everybody, and we just don't want it to happen. So the best thing to do is prevention. And then this is a photo of illegal camping that happened in the Heather Meadow last October, right after our revegetation planning project. And one of the wilderness rangers sent it to me and was like, I just had to show this to you, because she was so upset. And, I was just like, oh, it's kind of good that I wasn't up there, because I think I would have just had to like really make a fuss with these people. But they did get a ticket on the way back down. She told them, you can't be camping here. Don't have your stuff everywhere. Take out all your trash. And they even still dropped trash on the way back down. So this is a pretty stark example of what not to do. And it does still happen. So it's not like all the visitors are 100% on board with this kind of finicky preservation that we would like to have happen at this really fragile subalpine ecosystem. And this is a picture that was taken by one of our wilderness rangers, Winnie Sa, who was part of the planting expedition this year. And to me, it's just awe-inspiring. I mean, it's just really like, these kind of photos are why I work in this park. So I'm sorry, I'm such a softie, but it's so beautiful. So I just really want to thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for putting up with my emotionality. And also, I just want to say thank you to Caitlin and Randy and Eddie and WNPS staff has been amazing. And just any requests, any reference requests, any information that you are interested in from this collection, just email me. This NOCA curator email, I will get it. And this collection belongs to the people. And if you want a tour of the collection, you can come and make that appointment. Just know that it's funded and cared for by the American people, and it's here for you, and it's available. So there you go.
Sam, thank you.
Okay.
Your passion and your love for this project shine through in the most amazing ways, and it is a absolute privilege to be here with you and share that project with our community. Thank you so much. And I love too the reminders. I was listening to you to speak and reflecting on some of my own time up in those beautiful areas, how important it is for us to be reminded that we are one visitor out of many. We are one visitor in a chain that goes back thousands of years, and we are stewards of these places for us and everybody who's going to walk there after. And thank you for the very powerful reminder of that being so true. This is incredibly impactful. With that, we are going to open it up for questions from our participants to see if anybody has any burning questions to share now. Taking an eye on chat. Ooh, what logistical question? To ask for the display again of the email address to reach you, or could you say it one more time?
Oh, sure. It's just so in the Park Service, we have these 4-letter acronyms for every park, and it's always the first 2 letters of the first 2 words. So North Cascades is NOCA, so NOCA_curator at nps.gov.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right. And another one, if we have anybody out there that has old photos of the park from their past adventures or from the adventures of those who have gone before, should they reach out to you? What should they do?
It depends. We do have a lot of photographs in the collection already, and so we have a collection advisory committee, and they review all potential donations. And we have a scope of collection statement that identifies particular places that we are trying to have more documentation of, or so I guess what I want to say is I do get occasional offers of photograph donations, and it just depends. Sometimes if there's a really good context and a really good story, that's something that we're really interested in. If it's just honestly, if you're a really skilled photographer, that also might be something. But we did have somebody offered us, several hundred slides of their time in the park, and it was we have so many slides. We just have so many slides to process that I am a little reluctant to take on more slides. And the other thing is information. So if you have specific dates associated with your photographs, like for example, if you're a mountaineer and you've been taking photographs of glaciers and you can, identify even the month and the year, that's resource management documentation. That helps us figure out the state of that glacier at that time. But if it's kind of just generally pretty pictures, and there's not particularly any good story or data context for it, it's probably not something that we'll take on. So it all sort of depends.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you. Appreciate it. I have a follow-on question actually on the similar theme to dive into that deeper level. A question on how often the historical photos are used to compare against the current photos, before and after views for impacts to land, changes to glaciers, as you mentioned, or anything else happening in the landscape.
It depends. I mean, I think that's a lot of this project is to make that information available easily to park staff because especially with the slides, and so many of them were taken by resource management staff, it's really hard for people to get a good look at them until they're digitized and available. And you can actually like put it side by side with a modern digital photograph. So both for the revegetation program photographs and the archaeology photographs, that's a major impetus is to do staff support. And so I guess the answer is not as much as I would like. And that is a big motivator for this collection and things being able to be online. And what I hear from park staff is they automatically now will go to the digital archive and then it's like, no, wait. Like, remember, there's so much more in the museum collection. You should also be asking me because I can go look for stuff, as well. So, yeah, it's a work in progress.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Much more to come. All right. Unfortunately, we are out of time. But thank you for sharing all this information. And if folks do have more questions, they do know where to find us and stay in touch as this project evolves. And thank you so much for sharing where it is today and where it's going into the future. Before the show ends, we have a few dates to say for our community. Coming up right around the corner, December 3rd, thank you, Casey, is Giving Tuesday. Projects like the one you heard about today is supported by donors, and Giving Tuesday is a great opportunity to give back to the parks to sustain projects for next year and the years to come. We have some matching funds to take advantage of as well, which means your gift would double. We invite you to join us on Giving Tuesday, December 3rd at WNPF.org/Giving Tuesday. And thank you, Casey. Very next day, December 4th, we are hosting an open house at WNPF's offices in Seattle. It's a great opportunity to get to know our new CEO, Steve DeBuell, our board members, staff, and other community members. If you can't make it, we'd love to see you at the virtual field trip with Steve on January 16th for another chance to meet him and hear about his joining of the team and how excited he is to be a part of our community and get to know all of you. For now, though, the only thing left to say is to thank you again for joining us for another virtual field trip. If you'd like to see other episodes of our virtual field trips, you can find us on YouTube by searching Washington's National Park Fund. And as always, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for supporting the parks, and we look forward to seeing you all again next time. Thank you.